Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today. I'm your host, Sharlee Dixon, and today I'm joined by Janice Kaplan. Janice is a New York Times bestselling author, journalist, and former editor-in-chief of Parade. Janice has spent her career exploring what makes us happier and more fulfilled. Her book, The Gratitude Diaries, became a nationwide sensation, and her latest work, What Your Body Knows About Happiness, takes a groundbreaking look at the science of mind-body connections. With a career that spans best-selling books, award-winning journalism, and producing over 30 primetime TV specials, Janice has interviewed world leaders, Hollywood icons, and top researchers, all in pursuit of deeper insights into human happiness. We're thrilled to have Janice with us today to explore how simple, science-backed shifts in our physical actions, environment, and awareness can profoundly impact our thoughts, emotions, creativity, and overall well-being, revealing how the body influences the mind just as much as the mind influences the body. Thank you so much for joining us today, Janice. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. A pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So let's just jump right in. What inspired you to explore gratitude in the Gratitude Diaries and now shift your focus to body-mind connections and what your body knows about happiness?
I had been the editor-in-chief of a big magazine, Parade magazine, and after I left, a large foundation asked me to conduct a national survey on gratitude. And that sounded like sort of a vaguely fun thing to do. And it wasn't a topic I had necessarily thought that much about before, though as a magazine editor, I had certainly always been interested in writing inspirational stories. But the more I started understanding about gratitude and learning about it, the more I realized how life-changing it can actually be. And that's when I then decided that I was going to spend a year living more gratefully. And that's the book that ultimately became The Gratitude Diaries. And that book I know has had a big effect on a lot of people. It continues to be a big seller, and I'm very grateful for that. But I also started to realize that the focus of that book is very mind-centered. So the idea is that you can change your perspective and think about things in a different way, find the good in any situation. And I continue to believe that that's true. Absolutely. But I think we've also all been in situations where we suddenly feel good, where we suddenly feel happiness, where we suddenly have a sense of well-being or joy. And that happened to me one day. I actually happened to be on a boat in a beautiful sunny day. And I thought, what just happened that lifted my spirits? And I realized it wasn't my brain telling my body, it was something about my environment, something about the sensations around me. And that got me fascinated to realize that messages get sent both ways, that it's not just brain to body, it's also body to brain.
Absolutely. And just you speaking about being on a boat on a sunny day, it's rainy here. So just thinking about just that image of being on a boat on a nice sunny day, I really agree with that. Your environment may have a lot to do with shaping your well-being. So what simple changes can we make to our surroundings to feel happier?
Well, there are so many, but the very first and simplest one I can tell you is sit up straighter. If you're listening to this, stand up, sit up straighter, and maybe even give a little bit of a fake smile. There's lots of research that shows that when you sit up straight, you have more access to positive emotions. It may be that when you're depressed, you naturally slouch, and our brains, which are constantly scanning our bodies for information, see you slouching and go, oh, must not be feeling very good here. When you're sitting up straight, it's more likely that your brain will be able to access, as I said, those positive emotions. There's also been lots of research into smiling. And Sharlee, I'm sure you're familiar with that old experiment that was done by Fritz Strack back out of Germany, where he had people putting a pen in their mouth in a way that would either push their faces into a smile or a frown. Not an emotional response, simply how their facial muscles responded. And the people whose facial muscles were forced into a smile were happier and found comics funnier than people who were frowning. And so it may be that it became known as the facial feedback hypothesis, which says that how our facial muscles are sending information to our brains. A little sidelight on that, by the way, is that there's some new research that's being done on Botox finding that if people use Botox and they can't frown, it might have some effects on depression.
Interesting. That's really cool. Really cool. So even taking that a step further, it really sounds like like you mentioned, your mind really does influence the body and how it responds. And you've even done some research and showing that it kind of works both ways. Can you share some surprising ways that our body impacts our thoughts and our emotions?
Sure. There was one study that was done out of Yale by Professor John Barge. And this was really the study that got me interested in this and eager to continue. He had people invited to his labs, volunteers, and they're always college students, of course, to give their impressions of people who were described to them. They were going to be asked to describe how warm or kind they found these people. Without knowing it, when they were on the way to the lab, they were either given a warm cup of coffee to hold or an iced cup of coffee to hold. And the people who had been given the warm cup of coffee found the people who were described to them as being warmer and kinder than those who had been given the iced coffee. Now, that sounds a little bit crazy, right? How could that possibly be? But it
Yeah.
may be that our brains think in metaphors. When we're feeling warm, that sense of warmth goes to every part of our thoughts. And our brains get a little bit confused sometimes and they misattribute things. Another study that was done by Professor Joshua Ackerman, who's now at the University of Michigan, and he looked at negotiations and how people negotiate. And he found that when people are sitting in hard chairs, they negotiate harder than when they're sitting in soft chairs. So I don't know, soft chair, soft heart, or it may be that when you're sitting in that hard chair, there's something edgy and that sense of edginess gets moved through your body into your brain. And so your brain is responding a bit harsher. But I think realizing the messages that are getting sent to our brain when we're not conscious of them is really kind of life changing for me to start thinking, what is affecting how I feel?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so earlier we were both kind of mentioning how just being close to water can improve your mental health, your physical being. So what did you find and what type of blue spaces, how can they impact our health? Is it a strong impact? Is it just a mental thing? Tell me more about that.
Great question. And it's a huge impact. Both blue and green spaces have a very big impact on us. There was one study called the Mappiness Project that tracked people by GPS and pinged them at various times of the day to see what their emotional reactions were to things. And they found that the biggest connection they could find to happiness and a sense of well being was people being outside in natural settings. So, outdoors is good for you. And the water that you mentioned, absolutely. There's a professor who's, I believe, now in Vienna named Matthew White, who's done very extensive research into blue spaces and finding that 2 hours a week near water improves people's well-being very, very dramatically. And it doesn't have to be a big ocean. Most of us are somewhere near a lake or a stream or a river or a waterfall. And just going and enjoying that sense of calm, the sound of the water, the way the light reflects off the water. Nobody's exactly sure what it is, whether there's a hormonal change in our bodies, whether there's some physical change, but it does something that makes us happier. And it's certainly an easy fix and worth trying.
Absolutely. And you're making me, I feel very validated that my happy place has to include water somewhere, no matter whether that water is, in a mountainy area or an ocean, a tropical island. I kind of need water to feel that level of happiness. So you've definitely validated that for me.
Well, and I love that you mentioned your happy place because, I think if everybody closes their eyes for a moment and thinks about something that makes them happy, you're going to think of a place. And in all likelihood, it's not going to be a dark garage. It's probably going to be someplace outside. And that connection between happiness and place is very powerful.
Absolutely. So I've even heard that the connection of happiness or even creativity can also be linked to movement. So how can we use physical activity or even just you mentioned earlier about sitting up straight in our posture? How can that change and boost our creative thinking?
It is fascinating, or it was fascinating for me to discover that connection between creativity and movement. There was a study done out of Stanford by a professor named Marlia Pezzo, and she did one of those sort of standard psychological studies where people are asked to come up with as many different uses as they can for a key, and just it has to be creative and original. So if you say you're going to open your door with it, that doesn't count, not original. If you say you're going to use it to clean the bottom of your sneakers, that's a really good and original idea. So people were asked to come up with as many uses as they could for a key. And some of the people were asked to do that while they were sitting at a desk, and some did it while they were on a treadmill. And the people who were on the treadmill, who were working, came up with more than twice as many uses, were twice as creative. There have been other similar studies about creativity and movement that have found people are 80 to 90% more creative when they move. And, it's nice to have these laboratory studies that show it, but boy, people have known it for a long time. The great poet Wordsworth used to go out and take walks of hundreds of miles to write some of his great poems. Henry David Thoreau talked about, it requires my legs to move for my mind to take in new ideas. And I think why that's so interesting is because most of us, when we're trying to work, when we're trying to do something creative, what do? We hunch over our laptops, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we go, I am not getting up until I figure this out.
Yep.
And probably the opposite of what we should do. We should probably be going, I think I'm going to take a little stroll around the room. I'm going to go outside into the fresh air. I'm going to take an hour off and take a bike ride. When we let our minds flow, when we let our bodies move, those two things come together. When our bodies move, our minds begin to flow. And I think doing more of that could have a big effect on so many of us.
I completely agree with you. Especially, I've noticed that a lot of my coworkers or other people that may work in corporate America are starting to get the standing desk, or they have the walking pad up underneath their desk, which really, I agree, helps to, once you're moving your body, your brain is able to move as well. And interestingly enough, I used to work in an elementary school, and the principal of the school had done some research into non-traditional seating. And she found this research that said children that used exercise equipment while they were learning or studying or taking a test, they actually had better outcomes. And so she created these movement-based classrooms using modified bicycles. She had rolly ball chairs, all different types of movement-based seating. And the differences in the children that she chose children that were chronically kind of busy. They moved around a lot in their seat in a regular classroom, but they got into that classroom and their test scores skyrocketed, and the teacher was the same. The information was the same. The only thing that changed was just that action-based movement or that action-based learning that she, included in that classroom. So is that something that you've seen in your research, how the educational system, or even as I mentioned with adults, you can kind of disconnect from that? We need to sit and hunch, and being able to use that, movement to have more creativity and more productivity as well.
Well, I absolutely love to hear that story about the school, because that is so important and so innovative and so the opposite of what happens in most schools.
Yep.
I think one of the big problems in education is that, when we have little toddlers, we understand that they're supposed to use their bodies. We let them play with clay and we want them to dig in the sandbox, and we understand that that's learning. But then they reach maybe kindergarten, and all of a sudden we start telling children to sit down and be quiet. And that's not how they're going to learn. And as soon as that starts in kindergarten or first grade, the diagnoses of ADHD go soaring to the point that by the time you're in first grade, I believe 10% of children are diagnosed with that. And if you get to the point where 10% of children are allegedly having a problem, it's probably a problem with the system, not the children.
It's not the children, yeah.
So I think that if that wonderful school situation that you describe got better adopted elsewhere, it would make such a big difference. There's a wonderful psychologist who died a few years ago, way too young, named Sir Kenneth Robinson, who did some wonderful research on creativity. And he did, I think, one of the most watched TED Talks of all time, talking about how schools ruin creativity. And it is in part because of what you're saying, that we don't recognize movement, dance, motion, activity as part of learning and really part of life.
Absolutely. And even taking it a step further, when I worked in that elementary school, and even I used it in high school as well, I would tell the students that we were going to have walk and talk therapy. And I really would just get them from their class and we would walk around the school. Sometimes we'd walk outside, sometimes it would just be in the hallway or maybe the gym if they needed a longer talk. But the students were able to have more to share or feel more free to share how they were really feeling in those moments. And so I wonder if it even goes past creativity and productivity to being able to allow your emotions to flow more freely when your body is flowing freely as well.
Again, I absolutely love that you did that. And what you were doing actually has great precedence in that Aristotle and Plato used to walk while they were teaching. Aristotle started what was known as the peripatetic school because he would be walking and his students would follow behind. I think the idea of emotions also coming from the body is absolutely true. And yes, it's very hard to express yourself if you're forced to sit tightly in a chair. And, it may not be appropriate in schools, but I think for adults in life in general, we've lost the power of touch. We've lost the power of the idea of movement and touching and feeling and sensing and letting that be part of our experience, learning, and motivation.
Absolutely. So we spoke just briefly about your first book about gratitude. How would you say that gratitude and mind-body awareness intersect and improve overall happiness?
Great question. I think so much of what we're talking about with mind body happiness is really well being. And I think of gratitude and well being in very much the same way because there are things that have a deeper resonance than happiness. Happiness, I can be happy if I'm eating an ice cream cone, but as soon as the ice cream cone is gone, that might be over. So I think what we're looking for is things that give us some sense of control, that allow us to control the often uncontrollable events around us, and to know that no matter what happens, we have some power to feel differently. And I think gratitude does that. Gratitude says, okay, if I can change something, I'm going to. But if I can't, I still have to wake up tomorrow morning. I still have to put one step and one foot in front of the other. And how can I try to find the good in that situation? Because by finding that little bit of light, it's going to shed a lot of light on the darkness. And I think understanding our mind body connections does the same thing. It gives you one more tool, it gives you one more way to say, I don't have to be bandied about by what's happening. I can figure out where I put my body, what I touch, what my environment is, what sensations I take in, how I understand what my body is saying and how I'm feeling. And that gives me a different sense of control than I might otherwise have experienced.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor.
Most of us spend more time at work than anywhere else doing anything else. So why not spend that time in a job you love? Introducing Triad's Jobs Marketplace, the only job site dedicated specifically to behavioral and mental health professionals. Featuring more than 1,000 open jobs from dozens of behavioral and mental health employers, and searchable by location, professional field, employment type, specialization, and more. Jobs Marketplace helps you find your next career opportunity. Full-time, part-time, or gig time, make the most of your time. To access Jobs Marketplace, register for your free professional account at hellotriad.com/BHT. That's hellotriad.com/BHT, and then click to Jobs Marketplace. If you're already a member of the Triad community, visit app.hellotriad.com/jobs. That's app.hellotriad.com/jobs. Visit us today and take your next career step tomorrow.
I agree. So I really hear you speaking a lot about making small shifts. Earlier, you mentioned, sitting up straight or in your chair or smiling or even a small amount of movement and how they can really have a large impact. Can you share some more simple everyday actions that people can do just, without spending too much money or none at all to make them feel happier or have a better sense of well-being?
Sure. I think the simplest thing is that have a new experience. Our brains like to be lazy. Brilliant and wonderful as our brains may be, they like to be lazy. And when everything is just the same, they don't pay too much attention. Go out and have a new experience, do something different, and your body wakes up and your mind wakes up and you just feel different. You don't have to go on an exotic vacation. You can go to the local farmer's market and get a fruit you've never tasted before and taste that. Drive in a different direction to the grocery store than you normally go and just look at different streets and see different things. So I think if we give ourselves the pleasure of something new, and as I said, it can be just the smallest thing, it can have a very big difference.
And can you expound a bit more on other small everyday actions? I really like the idea of just simply taking a different drive towards the grocery store. It's kind of funny, and I guess I didn't even know what I was doing, but I like to drive through different neighborhoods, and my children and I look at houses as we drive through, not because we're going to buy them or because we want to move there, but just to look at different things. Or, even during the Christmas season, there's like a tracker that I have on my phone. And so we'll go and look at Christmas lights. So are there other simple everyday things that people can just do, on a whim or even plan ahead to just try something new or experience something in everyday life that they may not?
Well, that's such a lovely thing that you do with your children because that's a great experience to have together, but it also gives them something to look at and something different to think about and a way to appreciate the world around them and to have that physical sensation too. So that's doing both the gratitude and the mind body in one. Some simple things, we were talking about nature before. If you want to cheer up your surroundings, go out and bring some flowers into your house. Doesn't have to be anything expensive. Get a local bunch at your grocery store. People seem wired to respond positively to flowers. It may be, again, evolutionary biology that when we saw flowers, we knew that buds and fruit and blooms were not far behind. And so, we see flowers and get pleased by that. But there have been studies finding that bringing flowers into your house makes people happy for days and sometimes even weeks afterwards. So we talked before about that study on hard chairs and soft chairs and how people negotiate harder when they're on a hard chair. Well, flip that around. Throw some soft pillows around your house. Make sure that you have someplace comfortable to sit when friends come over, because people will respond to that without even realizing what it is that's making them feel better. People respond to sunshine. People respond to open and airy spaces. If you have high ceilings in your house, that's wonderful. If you don't, you can try to find ways to make it feel more airy, make it feel more open, and your body and mind may respond well.
Nice. And if you're like me, listeners, my thumbs are brown, no green there at all. My child builds me Lego flowers. And it's silly, but they work for me just the same. I look at them and it does give a sense of happiness. So if you aren't quite great with the plants, there's some hope for you out there.
Well, Sharlee, I tell the story in the book about flowers and knowing that they make you happy. And like you, not very good with plants, but I went out to my yard and I cut some beautiful white blooms and brought them in and put them on a jar. And I was so happy. And my husband came home and I said, look what I've done. And he said, they're beautiful. They happen to be weeds, but if they're making you happy, that's fine.
That's awesome. I mean, if they bring happiness, hey.
That's right. I think
they'll grow back fast.
Flowers, yeah.
That's awesome. So Janice, I know we focused a lot about happiness and some simple tips that we can do to bring about more happiness in our lives. But I do want to take a second to look at the other side of things. And in your book, I know you do mention pain and how we can potentially see pain or experience pain differently. Can you tell us more about that?
That was one of the fascinating subjects that I did come up with in the book. We tend to think of pain as being completely body focused. You have a headache, your back hurts, your knee hurts, you want to make it better. And so you focus on the location of the pain. Now, that's absolutely correct when it's an acute pain. When something happens, you wrench your back, it's a localized pain, you need to rest, you need to put on ice or heat or whatever is going to make it better.
Right.
But something like 80% of Americans have what's called chronic pain, which is pain that lasts for more than 3 months. And what researchers in the pain field have found is that at that point, the pain pathway is completely different. And it's going from body to brain and circling around. And it's no longer an issue often of the localized pain. Quite often, the initial back wrench or knee problem has gone away, but the brain is continuing to send a signal that it hurts. Now, people get very wary when they hear about this because they think, like, oh, you're saying that I'm making up this pain. And every pain researcher I spoke to said, no, the pain is real. You are feeling the pain. We are not in any way questioning that. But the pain is not necessarily coming from the localized place that you think it is. It's possibly coming from your brain. And research has been done where people who have had chronic pain for up to 10 years have had sessions of behavioral cognitive therapy where they are taught to think about the pain differently and taught to realize that the pain may be coming from their brain at this point, taught to even say, like, gosh, this is my brain tricking me. I don't want to be tricked by my own brain. And when they do that, the research finds that a vast majority of them are pain free for months afterwards and often for years afterwards. So it's just a new approach and a new way of thinking about pain that I think can be really life changing for so many people.
Wow, that is quite interesting to think that our brains are even in control. I mean, I suppose it makes sense though. If our brain is controlled or connected to how we experience happiness, it makes complete sense that it is also in connection to how we would experience pain, especially over a long period of time. That's interesting to me.
And you mentioned your kids before, and those electrical circuits that you do with kids all the time, and they have to build those little electrical circuits and make the light go on, right? And I've started to think of pain as being like that. And the pain is the light that goes on. And the circuit is the body brain circuit. And if you interrupt it anywhere, the light goes off, right? And so you don't need to interrupt it at the knee or the back or wherever the pain is coming from. If you interrupt it at the brain, the pain is also going to go away. And so I think if we think of pain as being a circuit rather than a localized problem, it can give you a different view of it.
Interesting. Thank you for that. Thank you. Janice, I love a good story. Can you share with us something to where somebody's life was changed by how they saw gratitude or how their happiness was connected with their mind and body?
Well, I'll tell you a funny story that happened to me while I was writing the book. And I went and I bought a new iPhone. And I used it for a couple of days and I was very unhappy with it. I just didn't like the phone. I couldn't figure out what was wrong. I wanted my old phone back, which had been so much better and made me so much happier. And I went back to the store and I went to the Genius bar and told them my problem. And fortunately, the genius there said, I think the problem may be your case. And I said, my case, what does that have to do with the phone? And he said, well, I've found that a lot of people who bought the case that you did don't like the phone. And the case protector I had bought for the iPhone was just, the cheapest one I could find. It was the hard plastic one they had with hard edges, and it was kind of clumsy. And he gave me the soft silicone one instead. And I held it. And it felt completely differently in my hand. And I said, okay, well, I'll try it for a couple of days. I don't think this is going to make any difference. And I took it home and I started noticing that, gosh, the camera on my phone was really working very well. And those apps were kind of much faster than I had noticed before. And it took me a while to laugh as you just did and realize like, oh no, the phone was exactly the same one I had just been complaining about. And truly what had happened was that the clumsy feeling in my hand of that plastic hard-edged case was sending a negative message to my brain. You would think that my brain would be smart enough to be able to tell the difference between good technology and a phone and a hard case, but it wasn't. The messages got all messed up. And it was a very powerful example to me of what happens because we all like to believe that, like, oh, no, I am smart enough not to let those kinds of things interfere with how I perceive the world. But there I had right in front of me an example of nope. Whether we realize it or not, we are all going to be affected by those mind-body connections.
That's awesome. So, as we continue to make our way through 2025, what's one major takeaway from your research that you hope people will apply in their lives?
Well, I think just to be a little bit more aware of the signals that your body is sending, to not feel that you always need to be buffeted by what's happening around you, that you can have a little bit more control over it, and to recognize that our bodies are powerful tools, that we have a beautiful partnership in mind and body. And the more we are able to exploit that, use that, understand that, the more joy and well-being we can bring to our lives.
Very nice. Thank you for that. So, Janice, where can listeners find your book, What Your Body Knows About Happiness, and how can they connect with you to learn more about the power of mind body connections?
Well, What Your Body Knows About Happiness is out now. It should be available ask for it at your local bookstore if it's not there. You can, of course, order it on Amazon or barnesandnoble.com. And my website is just janicekaplan.com. And there's a link there to talk to me. And I love to hear from people. Tell me your thoughts on the book and your stories about gratitude and mind-body connections. And I'd love to hear more.
Awesome. Well, Janice, thank you so much. I really appreciate you speaking with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And thank you to our listeners for taking the time to join us. You can follow us on our social media at Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, and even on YouTube at Behavioral Health Today. And if you like our show, be sure to give us 5 stars and leave us a review, which will help our show get discovered and share valuable insights in each episode. As always, the resources for this episode and an archive of all of our other episodes can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. And we look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today.
We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Triad Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.